Hey folks, Malforian here, and today we're going to be looking at the 10th Tinto Talks Dev Diary. This is the final of 4 economy-focused ones that Johan has been doing recently, and it is mostly going to be about trade, and this is for EU5, aka Project Caesar, their secret game that we don't know what he's talking about. And before we get going, as always, I will be doing a follow-up video to this, and that will be coming out on Friday. And Johan, even more than he usually does, has given us 5 pages of replies already, so there's going to be plenty to talk about on Friday. But with all that being said, let's get into today's, and that is about trade, markets, and merchants for the most part. There's going to be a lot of tooltip screenshots. A lot of them are pretty interesting. For those of you that think the game is leaning towards Victoria 3, you're going to be kind of reinforced in that belief during today. And he's also going to cover a lot of concepts. And he does say here, read through the dev diary a few times to kind of really understand how it's going to work. So as always, I will leave a link to it in the description down below if you want to read through the dev diary in your own time and kind of take a look through it. But on that note, as Johan says here, let's start with market themselves. They are dynamic and will change through the playthrough as countries create new markets and disband their old ones if they desire. Each market has a center in a location, and the owner of that location is in control over that market. I think this was covered in the second economy dev diary, so we knew a little bit of this already. Every location and coastal sea zone will belong to the most fitting market, which depends on the market attraction of that market, the distance between the location and the market center, diplomatic factors, and much more. And I'll quickly put up the map that was kind of like the header of this dev diary, and you'll be able to see how the markets look at this point in the game. As you can see for like the UK, it actually spreads out into some of the lowlands, and then all the other ones kind of look how you would expect them to around Europe, and they're all different colors, and you can see them at a glance and stuff like that. We'll get a lot more information about that in the future, but in the first tooltip we get to look at today, this is for the Riga market once again, which has been the one they've kind of defaulted to. You can see here the language Baltic, market attraction plus 6%, and then they got the greatest surplus and the greatest needs. So these are things that they've got a lot to export, and then also things they really want to import. So they've got a lot of wild game, tar, fur, beer, and fish, which makes sense in where it's located. And they want sturdy grains, sand, wine, fine cloth, and gold. But as Johan does say, a lot of the numbers here are still going to be very much in early kind of versions of them, and they will be balance changed before the game launches. So don't look at that and think, wow, gold's worth 50 gold. That's crazy. A lot of these are just kind of temporary numbers whilst they actually get the system working itself. And then outside of that, it does talk about the most powerful merchants, and that is the Kingdom of Sweden, the Hanseatic League, the Livonian Order, the Bishopric of Ozel, and the Teutonic Order, all realms around about Riga and in that area, so it all makes sense. And they do have a merchant capacity and the merchant power as well, so Sweden there taking a lot of the power and having a lot of influence in the Riga market. And then markets, they have merchants who have power depending on buildings and the maritime presence in the market. And the merchant capacity depends on the infrastructure for trade that a country has in that market. The merchant power impacts in which order exports from the market are executed, as there is not an endless supply of goods in a market. The merchant capacity impacts how much goods the merchants can ship as well. So in EU4, you have a certain amount of merchants, and you place them on different trade nodes to kind of steer trade where you want and collect it as much as you can. I wonder if this sounds like you don't have those anymore, and it is more down to these maritime capacity and things like that that are going to affect how powerful you are, and kind of getting away from you send a merchant somewhere and then all of a sudden you're more powerful in that area. It looks like potentially that is the case. And then our next screenshot, as he said, there's a lot of screenshots today. Hanseatic merchant capacity Riga, they've got the 4 contours there. The Merchant Advisory Council, trade monopolies is affecting it very badly, and then Merchant Republic is plus 50%. So obviously, if you play as a Merchant Republic, you're generally good at being a merchant, so that's why you get that crazy bonus. And then they are also the leader of the Hanseatic League, which gives them further bonuses as well. So they're doing pretty well. They're not actually the most powerful, as we saw in the last screenshot. Sweden actually has way more merchant power, but the Hanseatic League actually has more merchant capacity. So it sounds like that potentially they can have some advantages, even though they're not the most powerful merchant. Having those more merchant capacity will actually give them some other bonuses, as it says about like how much goods you can ship out. So you might be like second in the order of exports, but I guess if you can load up your ships better, maybe that kind of counteracts it a little bit. Again, we are getting this initial overview of trade. There'll be a lot more focus on this in later dev diaries. And then already we're on to our next screenshot. As you can see from this one, every good has a local price and a supply versus demand value as well. Let's look at the beer price in this tooltip. So beer in Riga, and this looks very much like a Victoria screenshot. This is what I was talking about earlier. Some of the things you'll see here look very like they do in Victoria, with obvious differences, but kind of in that kind of league anyway on how a system would work. And it's got the market price, how much it changes each month, the target price that it's trying to get to. It has a base price of 2 gold, which is modified due to the effective supply, the effective demand, and the price stability. So as you can see, there is a base price, I think, for every good, and then that is affected by a bunch of different things that can make it go higher or lower than that. Very much how supply and demand works in real life. And in this case, it's pretty cheap. It's cheaper than the base price. So I guess they're having a good old time drinking lots of beer in Riga. And talking further about the price, this will change every month towards the target price, which depends on the supply and demand of the good in the market. Price stability can change though through ages as well. I imagine that's goods like coal maybe. They get more and more important as the game progresses. The price stability is going to change as that becomes more of a contested good, I would think anyway. Next is supply and demand. The supply of each good in a market depends on several factors: the output of RGOs, the output from buildings, base production, and burger trades. So what is base production? Some goods like clay, lumber, sand and stone are produced in every market without the need for specific RGOs. Even an RGO with that raw material can produce much more, and there are buildings that can be built to provide these as well. So there are certain ones that are always produced, which makes sense. We were talking about in one of the early dev diaries, like, what if you don't have lumber at all? Can you build no ships, or like certain buildings will be very hard to build? It does look like these are available in every market, so you are going to have a supply of them of some kind. It might be pretty expensive, but it looks like you can always pretty much get hold of this, unless I guess the supply really does dry up and it gets crazy expensive. But you are going to see these kind of base goods that everyone needs. They're going to be available in all markets no matter what, by the looks of it. Also, your burgers will trade on their own if they have the capacity to do it. They will attempt to address needs within the market and could trade in a slightly shorter range, thus enriching their estates. There are laws and privileges that will impact them, like the Trade Monopolies Estate Privilege that the Hanseatic League has granted in the earlier screenshot, which reduces their own merchant capacity by 25% to increase the capacity of the burgers by 100%. So that's actually a pretty cool system there, where you're giving away some of your own power, but it kind of gets quadrupled into the burgers and they get way more capacity. But then obviously they're doing all that trade. It's not under your control then. But I would imagine you then earn tax and things off them. They're going to like you more, so you'll probably get more things out of them anyway. Concessions in other areas of the game. So it's probably a quite good trade-off to do, but already we've seen these kind of specialized mechanics in certain areas. So that's enough about supply. What about demand? This is primarily from the maintenance, input, and construction of buildings, recruiting and maintaining armies and navies, and the demands of the population, but there are more sources as well, as they have talked about previously. Of course, trades themselves impact supply and demand as well. Obviously, the more trade that happens, the lower and higher the supply and demand is going to get, which is how most economies generally work anyway. And then trade itself. You can use your merchant capacity in a market to either export a good from that market or import a good from another market. Of course, that market needs to be within your range, which is not globe spanning in 1337. So as we did discuss in a previous video, there are going to be these trade routes at the beginning, but they're going to be very much more localized. And then as the game expands, as you discover more areas of the world, once you find the new world, you travel to the Far East if you're playing in Europe, or the opposite if you're playing somewhere in those lands. That is then going to expand the trade network. And ultimately, you're going to get a globe spanning trade system. And that's going to help you kind of like even out the trade a little bit, depending on who's in control of it. A trade is a variable amount of goods shipped from one market to another, purchasing it at the local price in the exporting market. The longer the distance between the market, the more capacity each good will require to ship, and the higher the maintenance cost will be. So you can trade things at a long distance, but it is going to be expensive. But again, I imagine as you get further into the game and technology progresses, it will kind of negate some of those negative effects and make it a little bit more worthwhile. And also, if you're trading something very early, like spices, I would think, you're probably going to make a lot of money from them. If you're one of the sole people who are importing them, you're going to be making the money until everyone else catches up with you as well. So it kind of works in a couple of different ways. Trades have an impact on the last land location they are in before it leaves the market, and the first one they enter in the importing market, giving boosts in development to them over time. A trade will always trace a path on the map. So you will actually not like see it moving along the map, but you'll see those trade routes, and they always take a route across the map. They don't just magically teleport about. And then as you can see, having these trade networks under your control, especially the last one that leaves and the first one in the importing market, these are going to be really good places to get because you're getting that boost to development over time. So they're going to slowly build up and get better and better, more developed due to all the trade that's happening in there. So certainly one way to play the game if you're maybe potentially playing tall as well. It's going to be a cool thing to do. Build up a powerful market that affects a lot of places, and you're going to be making a lot of money. The next tooltip that we have is for tar, which is a trade good. These merchants are from the Kingdom of Sweden. The amount of tar traded last month, 1.18. Desired amount, 1.18. So they did trade the amount they wanted to. In the Riga market, I guess it's costing them 1.46. It is exporting through Riga. It is using 1.53 merchant capacity. It says 100%, so I guess that was all of Sweden's merchant capacity maybe, or maybe it's just saying it is using the most it can do for this certain thing. It is importing it through the London market, so it's coming from London and then going to the Riga market. The maintenance for the merchant being there. The sound tolls, they're going to cover this in a second. This was discussed, I think, last week or the week before, where there's going to be certain areas on the map where you can kind of gain control of the shipping lane, and then you could charge tolls for trade going through there. So again, that's going to be a cool campaign to do, potentially. Take over some of these toll areas on the sea lanes, and then just make a bunch of money through trade going through there. You can maybe have like a bit of a game trying to push all trade through there, maybe cut off other trade routes, so everything has to go through there, and then you're just going to be making loads and loads of money. I'm sure you're going to make a lot of enemies as well, so it is going to be a bit of a dicey situation, but I think it could be pretty cool to do. And then the trade profit is 8.27 gold. I think everything laid out pretty well there. You can kind of see all the information that you need. Again, these are kind of temporary tooltips and everything. It is going to look a lot better than this at launch. It's just giving us the information whilst they test things and get it working. So that is how One Good would work going through Riga. And then as they mentioned earlier, one part of the trade system is diplomacy, and there are many diplomatic factors that can impact trade and markets in the game. First of all, you can deny market access to a nation owning a market, and that will reduce the attraction of their markets on your location, but will also make anyone with merchants in those markets upset with you, so you can kind of like lock them down in their area. You're going to do much better out of it. But as they say, the person you use it against is not going to be too fond of you. And then also anyone else who has merchants there are also going to be upset because you're also causing effects to them as well. So they're probably going to try reprise against you if possible. You can also request and or offer market access preference, making it likelier for a country's location to belong to a certain market. So it looks like you can kind of diplomatically sway people to come into your market control. So you wouldn't like take over that country, but their kind of trade would then move into your trade market, and you kind of like economically integrate them into your area in a way. So again, that's a pretty cool system. If you do dislike paying sound tolls, as we talked earlier, you can actually ask to be exempted from them through diplomacy with a country that controls the strait. So again, you can even build up these areas where you're making money through the tolls, but then you can also use it diplomatically to say, okay, I'll exempt you from that toll, but you're going to give me some other thing for me doing that. Maybe you're going to give me some other bonus, some other alliance potentially, if I'm going to make it so you're making more money and exempting you for the money that I can make. So again, that's another little cool synergy between the diplomacy and the trade area of the game. As we saw last week, a lot of these systems kind of working together, which is cool to see. Some countries have isolated themselves completely, so you will need to negotiate a specific exception to allow you to export and import from those markets. I think they're a pretty famous example, and if you're watching the TV show at the moment, Shogun, which is amazing, you really do have to watch that show if you haven't already. This is a pretty famous example where Japan kind of shut themselves down and said, like, no external, like, Europeans, like, we don't want you here. And then the Portuguese especially kind of got in there, set up an island trading post, and they were pretty much the only people that traded with them for a long time until, like, the English and then the Americans and stuff came in there. So it is cool, again, to see these kind of, like, historical versions of things coming into the game. I'm sure there were other places as well, but the Japan one is the one that's kind of in my mind just because the Shogun TV show, which is so good, and that's why it's in my mind, and it fits pretty nicely with this example. There's also the possibility to embargo a country, which will block the merchants from that country to trade in your markets, and they will also not be allowed to move through your country. Of course, this is a legit casus belli, so use with care. So yeah, don't just go around embargoing everybody. Again, they're going to be very upset with you. They're probably going to try to do some kind of reprisal if you do this a lot, especially if they're a country that does a lot of trading. They're not going to be too pleased with you. And then outside of all those kind of ideas about trade, what are the other aspects of trade? Each market can have a specific good banned from export or import, with the one common example being that Muslim markets will ban import or export of wine, beer, and liquor. They mentioned in an earlier Tinto Talks that markets will have stockpiles, so the surplus can be stored there for a rainy day. There are buildings that will increase the amount that can be stored. There are also foods in this market, with prices adapting to the supply and demand of food as well. And there is a screenshot here showing, again, the food stockpile in the Riga market, showing the top 5 producers and the top 5 consumers. So the people who are making the most amount of food, and those are the top 5 food consumers. So you can see kind of like who's doing well, who's doing not with food. There could be multiple reasons for this. If Königsberg down there is a war and they're just consuming a lot of food because all their farmers are off fighting, etc., they could be temporarily a consumer, and the producers, maybe they're just having a good time, focused on farming, and they're not really doing anything to interrupt that. So this can obviously flex around a lot depending on what's happening in your campaigns. And as they discussed with the other systems last week, there was a lot of automation options where you could assign the trading completely to the AI. You can also lock some trades so the AI will not interfere with them. Again, fantastic options. If you just want to concentrate on something else, maybe you're playing your first couple of campaigns and you don't really care about trade, you set it all for the computer to do. But then also, if you're trying to learn, maybe there's some good that you kind of like don't want them to just mess around with, you can lock certain goods away from that. So some things you can control yourself, and then everything else you can lock behind it, or vice versa. And again, having that choice is fantastic to see. And that is our first look at trade. Not that big of a dev diary. These don't generally tend to be that long. They just give us a nice overview of a system, gives a bit of information. But as always, the Friday follow-up video that I do with Johan's replies generally is about 3 times longer because he gives us a lot of information about what was talked about in this. And then he also gives away information about other things. I've seen already there's a couple of interesting bits that he's talked about that aren't anything really to do with this system at all. So we will discuss those on Friday. And next week, they're going to be talking about mercenaries, levies, and regulars. So we're getting onto the military-focused ones potentially, which is going to be really cool, seeing how mercenaries, levies, and regulars work. In one of the early dev diaries, might even have been the launch one, I can't remember now, they did say that this is going to work very differently. Of course, it starts in an earlier time frame where there aren't really standing armies. It's more about levies and things will gradually change as you progress through the game. And it did look like that mercenaries are going to be more important than they were in EU4, and it's going to work a little bit better than it did in previous games, which is how I think most things look. I think this version of trading and things look a lot better, and we'll get more information about this, obviously, at announcement and beyond. But that is it for the Dev Diary today. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. As always, hit that like button if you have. Subscribe if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 up to announcement, launch, and beyond, and I cover a lot of Crusader Kings 3. They're building up towards the next expansion for that as well. But on that note, we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.